So, fear. Research tells us that fear instills things of fight or flight. So makes you feel like you're going to run away or have to fight your way out of something, right? Well, I want to show you a picture. This is Julio. This is a good friend of mine's dog. And if you saw Julio coming at you, your first thought would be like, oh my God, I got to run or else I'm going to beat the hell out of this little chihuahua, right? But the thing is that Julio is actually smiling. That's how he looks when he's smiling and coming to greet you. So fear is irrational, and not all fear is actually bad. It's really how we channel it that makes it good or bad, and you've heard that from the wonderful speakers who have come before me. For me, I would say my greatest fear gave me my strongest values, hands down. And my greatest fear has nothing to do with fear of public speaking. It has nothing to do with fear of getting old, because if you're not getting old, you're only getting one thing. My fear is not of dying. My greatest fear came from disappointing my grandmother. My grandmother, who I call Nana, this picture of her was her passport picture. It's 1917. She was 22 years old. She was born in 1895. And she went through Canada as a way of coming into the United States. And she actually molded me, I would say, into the woman I am today. I spent a lot of time with her while my mom was working. She taught me the things that I should and shouldn't do, and those kind of things that you feel as a little kid, and that closeness that you feel with your grandparent. You know, I didn't realize how much she influenced my life until one day when I had a job interview years later. And the hiring manager loved me. She heard good things about me. I was all ready for this interview until she said, "What are your values?" And I looked at her like she had 9 heads. And I was just like, and I said, you know what, I don't know. I'd never been asked that before. So if you allow me to think about it overnight, I'll come back. I'll call you and let you know if that's okay. Can we go with the rest of the interview? And she said, fine. And back then, it wasn't like you could just email. There was no email. You had to call. And so I went home and I thought about it and I said to myself, whoa, what are my values? I had to sit there and think about it really hard. And this story came to mind. I was about 9 years old and me and Nana were making cake. She was always baking something. I can't bake that's not what I gained from her at all. But she was making a cake, and so you know how when you're little and either your parent or somebody you love, grandparent, is making a cake and you're waiting for that batter, because you know that batter on the spoon or the whisk is like the best part. It's like cake batter. So I was just sitting there waiting for that cake batter. And then all of a sudden the doorbell rang, and she undid her apron and she put it on the table and she went to the door. She had a sort of look on her face like, I wonder who this is. And so me, of course, being her shadow and she's my hero, I followed right after her, right behind her, walking to the door. And I'm trying to get in between to see who it is, and she's kind of pushing me to the side, and she opens up the door, and it had the chain on the door, and she said, yes, and I could hear somebody say something. I was trying, I was so nosy. I was trying to figure out what was going on, and she said, how many? And she said, okay, go sit on the stairs. So then she proceeded to walk back into the kitchen, and I walked back with her, and I'm running behind her. Who's that, Nana? And she just kind of ignored me. And she went into the refrigerator, and she took out bread, and she took out ham and cheese, and she made sandwiches, and she cut them in half, and she put a lot of detail into these sandwiches. And we started walking back towards the door, and she said, here, go and bring this to the men outside. And back then, you didn't really have to worry about going out to the door and being kidnapped or something like that, but she was right there. And so I went outside, and I remember going up to one of the men And they were sitting, we had a brownstone, and they were sitting on the stairs, and the guy kind of stood up, and I remember kind of looking at him, and I gave the plate, and I remember just running back in the house. And that's all I really remember from this story. I don't remember what happened afterwards, but something very significant happened. When I went back in the kitchen, I sat down. This actually is the part that I do remember that's so significant. I sat down, and my grandmother looked at me, and I said, "Nana, why do we feed those stinky men? Why are we giving those men food? Like, they're dirty. Like, why are we doing that?" And I'm going on waiting for my batter, being a 9-year-old, and my grandmother just stopped what she was doing. And she turned around, and she looked at me in a way that I had never seen her look at me in my life. And I never, ever, ever will forget it. And she's been passed years and years. And it wasn't that look that you get when you're about to get a spanking, and you know how that look is. I'm sure we all remember how that looked. But no, it wasn't that. It was a look that to this day still terrifies me. And she said, "How dare you? How dare you talk about somebody like that? Who are you? What if you had no food? What if you didn't have somebody to give you a roof over your head and to buy your clothes? What would you look like? What if you couldn't bathe? What would you smell like?" She said, "Those men are heroes. Those men fought in a war. It was the Vietnam War. And a lot of our men came back drug addicts, alcoholics. It was a hard time." And I sat there, and the tears were just streaming down my face. And it wasn't because of what I said. It was because I disappointed the person who was my hero. Like, I felt so much shame. And that feeling consumed me. And I couldn't stop crying, but she didn't care. This was that one time when she didn't hold me and say, "It's going to be all right." Instead, she said, "Go outside and get the plate from those men." And I remember walking, and I remember going to the door, and I remember going outside and getting the plate, and I was still crying. My shirt was just drenched. And one man, that same man, said to me, "Little girl, why are you crying? What's the matter?" And I said, sobbing, I said, "Something mean about you." And my grandma said, "You're heroes, and I'm sorry." And he said, "No, we're not the heroes. You and your grandmother, your family are heroes because you fed us. You took the time to take care of a stranger. You gave to us." And he said, "I want to show you something." And he looked at the other two gentlemen and he said, "Attention." And they stood up and they saluted me. I didn't know what that meant at 9 years old, but he said to me, "See, we don't salute people that are not important." And I remember that moment, and I ran back in the kitchen. Well, fast forward, I don't know how many years it was, but I was in my 30s, so you do the math, 21 years. I call up the hiring manager, and I told her that story, and I said, "So my values are giving, my values are empathy, my values are love. It's love, giving, and empathy." And I felt so good about saying it because I realized that those things were instilled in me years ago because I was so afraid of disappointing my grandmother that those things stayed with me all my life and are with me today. And she said, "Thank you. When can you start?" Well, here's what I've always wanted to have a platform to ask. What would we be like as human beings if we feared discrimination? If we feared to discriminate against others? If we feared to judge others, if we feared to blame and to hate, what would we be like as a society if those feelings came up and we were afraid of them coming up? So we did not do them. So we changed and we created values around our fears that make us better. What would we be like as human beings? Fear. You can forget everything and run. You can face everything and rise. It's your choice. So I want to say to you, are you going to allow fear to be a barrier of your growth and everything great that you can be? Or are you going to allow yourself to let fear consume you? Or are you going to allow yourself to change and to see infinite, infinite possibilities for the rest of your life? The choice is yours. Thank you.